everybody, welcome to the Icehouse Podcast. I'm here in Queenstown with Sarah McGuinness. She is the founder of Revolutionaries of Wellbeing. Would you call yourself founder, CEO? What would you say your title is?
Oh, I always find that really hard to answer because, when you're a founder and entrepreneur, you're kind of everything.
Exactly, exactly. I get that a lot. Like, people say that, so I understand. But looking forward to this conversation because it's going to be about your journey as a business owner, which is cool, but also a bit of a deep dive into, your expertise, wellness, burnout, resilience in leadership and in business owners. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. But you've also been a coaching client of the Icehouse over the years, so I'm looking forward to touching on your experience there too. But thank you, Sarah. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
No worries. I think this is probably the most beautiful location. We're in the BNZ Partner Centre in Queenstown and it's stunning, so it's nice to be recording a podcast in here. But I like to start with quick fire questions. So, first ever job.
That's a really good question. I had to think back, and actually, if I went back as far as I can think, I used to water the plants at my dad's work.
Oh, wow.
I used to go in, and I would do shredding as well, and I would water the plants, and I would also have to spray them so that they didn't have dust on them.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
job.
That's actually, I've never heard that one before in this question, and I like it. It's a good first job.
It was funny because my dad was he was a chief financial officer, and so obviously it was like going into a corporate office. And so of course when I'd finished all of that, and often he would sit at his desk and do work, and so I would go into the boardroom and pretend to have presentations. So I felt completely comfortable in boardrooms since age, 10 or whatever.
I love that. You're like, I'm going to make the most of this. This is great. Favourite ever place?
Queenstown.
Nice.
Yeah,
Good
I
move.
just love it here so much.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It is stunning. If you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
I had to think really hard about this one. And I reckon it would probably be Catherine Mansfield, the author.
Yeah.
I've always been, we grew up going to Auckland, I had family there, and we would often go to her house, and I read a lot of her material, and I just was really interested in her story, and I think she would be really fascinating given the interesting life she led in the short time that she was alive.
Yeah, cool. That's awesome. I like that answer. Were you born with your skill sets, or have you developed them?
I was both, but born with that real interest in people, and I can say that really confidently because my mum is an engineer and my dad's an accountant, so totally different skill sets. So I got something to compare it to. Yeah. But then I think obviously so much of it is what you learn as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. I like that. Book or podcast you recommend?
I had to write this one down to get it right, but I recently read The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness. It's a memoir by Sarah McGuinness, and I have fibromyalgia, and she wrote this book about her journey with chronic illness as well, and going through the health system. This is in America, but I had the same experience here, and I know it's not the only one, and it was just a book that really resonated with me, and I just thought it was brilliant. So I've been recommending it to anyone who's interested in what the inside journey of a chronic illness is like.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, great recommendation. Nice. I like to start that way. It just sort of, helps me get to know you a little bit better. But I want to kick into this great open question that everybody loves. Who is Sarah? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's really, it's such a massive question.
It is,
isn't it?
Everyone's like, whoa, how do I unpack my life story?
Yeah. And I really feel like I've been on a huge personal development journey since I burnt out at the end of 2020, and I've had some really big milestones that I've hit and some discoveries. And so I guess how I describe myself now before I jump into it is probably different than I would have five years ago or even 10 years ago. And to kind of put a bit of backstory on that, so I burnt out in 2020, and then in the kind of following months, got a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, and a diagnosis of ADHD, and then I walked away from my marriage at the start of the year. So that question around who am I is actually the question I've been asking myself, a lot recently. Wow. And a lot of it's been going back to what did I love as a kid? What was really important to me before mental health was kind of a thing that took over my brain? What did I love doing? And so I would say Sarah is someone who absolutely loves talking with people, interacting, engaging, communicating. I love the psychology of things. It just lights up my brain. I love all of the media stuff as well. I love design. I love creativity. I love reading. My little dream is to have a library in my house.
Yes.
I'm slowly collecting books, but I actually want like one of those ones that that they have in the fairy tales.
Yeah,
like
and the moving ladder.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see the vision.
Yeah, totally that. Yeah. And I think I'm really strongly influenced, I think, by a friend of mine who died during my teenage years. She got meningococcal and so died really quickly. And I'm often really mindful that I'm having experiences that she just never got the chance to do. And so when I look forward, and part of this, in terms of the development I've been through, is going, I've got another, statistically, another good 40 years of my life, what I want them to be, because what I want to do is be able to get to the end, turn around and go, damn, that was a good life.
Yeah,
I don't want to get to the end and be like, oh, well, that was a bit like, meh.
Yeah, a bit average. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I think that drives a lot of what I do, is just making the most every day. And
brilliant answer. That's very cool. Thanks for sharing and opening up about that. Appreciate it. What was that discovery of your career journey and looking at the things you've done in the past? Really, you've found your lane in the people culture wellness space. What was that journey for you of finding, okay, this is my zone, this is where I want to be?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think I've always had this real interest in people, and during my teenage years I thought I wanted to be a film director, and so I wrote a script and I took it to Hollywood, and then kind of got to Hollywood and went, this is not kind of what I had in mind. Yeah. And then I went to AUT and did a communications degree majoring in PR, but I thought I wanted to read the news. I knew there was something kind of in media and communication I was really passionate about. But did some work experience at TV1 and TV3 and went, yeah, no, this isn't it. I haven't found it yet. Yeah. So I majored in PR and thought it would be, really glamorous and working with people and all the rest of it. But actually mostly it's sitting at a computer, typing stuff.
Yeah, so true.
Again, not really what I had in mind. And so I had one of those, what am I doing with my life moments. Yep. I was in a corporate job in Melbourne, arguing with an ad agency late at night over an ad that no one was going to read or do anything about. And I just thought, what am I doing? People save lives and I'm arguing about a sentence. Like, this is so unfulfilling.
Yeah.
And I think I'd also found too that I was starting to get to the point where, again, I was like, this is, in the grand scheme of things, this stuff doesn't matter. Like, we would be doing communications about, she wants a green box, he wants an orange box. Like, I don't really care what colour box it is, to be fair. Like, I really don't care. So I went back and studied psychology, and I guess underneath all of that, I had my own mental health challenges during that time. So kind of had this personal journey as well, and this interest. And then in one of my corporate jobs, I worked for a manager who was just totally out of her depth. And we ended up as a team on the Gold Coast in Australia with a clinical psychologist trying to work it out. And she got us to draw trees about where we wanted the team to go. We were just like, just remove the manager and we'll all be fine.
Yeah, wow.
But I could see that I could step away. I could almost, rationalise it and understand that, okay, she's not a great person. But clearly she's lacking some capabilities, and I can separate the two. So it became a real interest area for me. So
that's interesting.
Went back and studied psychology. All the way through, I was really focused on midlife. I find that a really interesting time. So between the ages of 30 and 60, because there's so many biological, sociological, psychological milestones that happen during that time. Yeah. And it's kind of the peak of our career. So like, you're totally like, should be the highest, most intense time of your life, and it is, but it's also one of the most stressful times of your life. And there's some really interesting graphs that show at your 40s, that's often when you're at the lowest peak of happiness. So it's like super interesting. Focused on that, moved into leadership development in state government in Australia. Found that we weren't really talking about wellbeing, and I remember raising it, and someone said, "Oh, well, we did stress management for an hour." And that's not really wellbeing.
Like, hold on.
It's not quite what I had. And my honours research was on the midlife eating attitudes and body image dissatisfaction, and again, really interesting stuff coming through around, what are some of the pressures for women, what are some of the pressures for men, what are some of the things that impact on how they see themselves, and so from that I wanted to get into doing health coaching the same way they do it in Australia. So a lot of them are embedded in GP clinics. I did Flinders University, have this amazing course. and I was living in Christchurch at the time, but just as an entrepreneur, just couldn't get it off the ground. I would go and see doctors and talk about, the services, and it's funny to see it being rolled out now in GP clinics. I think it's just too early.
Timing, yeah.
But I remember one of them saying to me, well, we have, this was a surgeon actually, we have the pharmaceuticals coming in here and offering us trips to Paris. What will you be offering? And I was like,
oh my gosh.
Not trips to Paris.
Yeah, not that.
Not that. I can't even pay for myself to get to Paris. You won't be going on my money.
So true.
So
wow.
So from there, I was thinking that for corporates, maybe that's how we get it in there. Thinking like truck drivers, for example, like that would be a really good market for perhaps some online health coaching type stuff. But found when we went to go and talk to organisations at the time, they were still in that phase of going, what is wellbeing? And so that probably led largely the path into where what I'm focused on now, which is around the corporate research and strategy and community and all that stuff, because it kind of met the need. But in terms of going back to how I landed into it, it's been as much as a deliberate journey as it has about almost trying to find your way in a dark tunnel and trying to look for light switches see which ones come on.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. How did Revolutionaries of Wellbeing come about? Was it like an aha moment, or was it sort of an evolution of things and it just sort of like developed into what it is today? And then what do you offer?
Cool. So in terms of how it came about, it's been such an iterative journey over the last little while that it's sort of hard to pinpoint exactly when it started, although there have been some kind of key milestones. Yeah. So we were under a brand, My Health Revolution, and I had my own personal brand, Sarah McGuinness, and we're kind of growing the two. And one of the things was I went out to talk to lots of organisations, and they said, oh, well, what are other people doing in this space? And so I said, well, this is like, really pre-COVID, so it seemed quite out there to go, let's catch up online every 6 weeks, and I'll interview someone, or we can share and we'll just talk about what we're doing. And that was the foundation of the community, and it literally just grew by word of mouth. And over kind of 18 months, and at the time I was living in Christchurch, and then when we moved to Gisborne, I kind of, because we'd just moved and there was lots going on, I kind of lost my energy for the community, and I actually thought about letting it go for a while, only for a short period. And then when COVID hit, it just became so apparent, because it kept growing, even though I was a bit like, it just kept growing.
There's another person, there's another person. Oh, okay, I'm meant to be doing this. And
they would sign up from all over the world, from the most random countries, and I would have to Google, like, where is that? Okay, cool. So awesome. I think when COVID hit, it became really clear to me that was, the community was a massive part of it. And I think that herein lies kind of the challenge for us, is that the community is what people want and they want to connect in it, but it's at the same time, it's such a new area. It's not like setting up a group of accountants where they all know what their career path is, and like everyone fell into it. Everyone's trying to sort of find their way. So in terms of growing the community, it's both been a really sort of easy thing to do in some ways, but also really challenging in terms of getting people to engage and on a regular basis, because they're normally juggling several different roles, and often they're going from kind of crisis to crisis, especially with COVID. So that's made it interesting and challenging at the same time. In terms of what we offer now, and I think this has partly grown because of the support that organisations have needed. So on the one hand, we have the community, and there's kind of two parts to that. So we run a monthly webinar, we interview someone, we turn it into a podcast.
Awesome. And
then we have a paid, a professional group, and that's got its own sort of version of a LinkedIn, and people are able to communicate, share resources. And
brilliant,
it's a huge amount of generosity. Everyone's on the same page, so it's kind of like, look, here's a thing I created, take it,
use it,
do what you need to, which is super cool, and then on the other side is the consulting part of it, and that's really grown from people going, I need help doing anything really, right from defining wellbeing through to, we do little things even, someone will ring and be like, I have to present to the leadership group next week on wellbeing, help. So it's doing little jobs like that, anything really to be that friend at the end of the phone when it comes to wellbeing.
That's very cool. I like that, friend at the end of the phone. That's important. It's very important. That's cool. I want to dive deeper into into your industry with this great question. What is a misconception about your industry that you'd like to debunk?
A really common misconception is that it's all people laughing over salad and doing yoga on a beach. And, I think it's evolved. I think most people would now accept that, especially with the mental health piece, that it's more difficult than that. I think where we're at the moment is that in some ways, while there's been all this work, a lot of organisations are still putting it back on the employee in terms of going, oh, well, we just need to run more resilience training. We just need people to be a bit stronger. We just need, which is still the conversation we were having in the 80s about stress management. Like, it's still your fault. And my colleague Chris has a really good analogy. He's like, well, resilience training is like putting on a bulletproof vest. I mean, that's great. It'll give you some skills. But why don't we just not put them in an environment where they're having bullets thrown at them? Like, yes.
So true. Yeah.
So I think as I said, I think we're getting better at it, but I would love to see more organisations actually embrace that organisational side of it and go, how do we manage, work hours and job demands and all those really unsexy things that when it comes to wellbeing, it's way easier to have a morning tea because it looks really great and you can take some nice photos and everyone has a nice time, but actually from a sustainability point of view, it's not what makes the difference.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, and sometimes from what I can see anyway, this sort of thing isn't always a program or an event. It's a culture. It takes years to properly outwork. It's a long-term play. And I think in business, we're not used to things that are long-term plays, or you'll start seeing outcomes in 2 years, or, it's you're like, I want to see outcomes next week. And that doesn't happen in wellness, I would say.
My goodness. It was so funny. Chris and I were just laughing about this the other day. We totally find what happens when we talk to prospective organisations, this happens so often, is they go, yeah, we'd love to do something about wellbeing. Send us a proposal. So it goes quiet for 6 months. Yeah. And all of a sudden, like, it needs to happen on Monday. Start on Monday.
Yeah. Something's happened.
Start Monday.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, if we started 6 months ago, that thing probably wouldn't have happened.
This would be so different.
Yeah, so true.
And I think the other thing too, actually, now that I think about it, is, and this is such a good example, so we did some work with Sea Lord, and one of the things that the people on the vessels wanted was better Wi-Fi, so they could stay connected with their family.
Wow.
And it's a really good example of, you wouldn't typically think of that in your wellbeing strategy, better Wi-Fi. Yeah. But actually, in terms of the outcomes, that made a huge difference for them. So sometimes, the things to look for are not necessarily the mindfulness apps or the...
Yeah, and I'm sure it's actually just asking your people, which...
100%.
Yeah, which seems... I did like a little podcast about how to build a good community strategy, and I was like, well, you got to ask your community what do they want, and I think it's maybe similar in wellness where it's like you put a strategy together, but have you actually asked your team what they want? Because I don't know if Sea Lord would have picked Wi-Fi as the thing that would really help. So that's really interesting.
Totally. Yeah, in fact, that's been a big part of our work, and I haven't really touched on that. Over the last couple of years, we've done it for a number of organisations where we've literally started from, and we're doing it at the moment for a national sporting organisation, and we're doing it for a really big medical association as well, where we've literally started with a survey and then focus groups and then one-on-one interviews to say, what does wellbeing mean to you? Like, what's the language that you use? It's what we did with Sea Lord. What are some of the things that, when you think of a great day at work, what does that look like for you? What's the language that you use? And then what you do out of that is you develop a wellbeing framework, and the strategy just absolutely, it writes itself because you've asked people. And we're really big advocates on kind of two things. One is doing wellbeing with people and not to them. Yeah. And that protects people's kind of self-efficacy and their ability to think that they're in control, but also you're changing the environment so they have those choices. Yeah. And the other part is a behaviour change statement that we love, which is people support what they help create.
Brilliant.
And again, it's that whole thing that if we take people on the journey, and there's some really key messages around it. We all have a responsibility in this. We can't do this on our own. We need you to do this with us. That's such a different message to, we're now doing a wellbeing program. Oh, I've got no engagement.
Yes,
because we haven't taken everyone on the journey.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah. Can you unpack a little bit the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing approach? I saw something on your website about, how you guys sort of do things. Could you unpack that a little bit more?
We have a little triangle.
Yes, I saw that. I was like, I love this.
And it's been, funnily enough, it's been a recent development to actually put it into the triangle. We've been operating that way for pretty much since day dot. It was just a conversation that my colleague Chris and I had, that we went, oh, actually, this is how we do stuff, we can make a model out of it.
Brilliant.
So it has, 3 points, and the first bit, I guess, is professional expertise. So we both come from sort of university qualifications. We've worked on this a long time. Obviously keeping up with what the research is saying. Yeah. We're big data geeks. We love data.
Love that. Yeah, that's good.
So constantly kind of diving into the research. So, really solid kind of background. But the other two pieces, which I think are absolutely key to this wellbeing piece, is one, lived experience. So we've been there, done that, as we like to say. We've got the scars to prove it. We've worked in corporates. We've worked those corporate halls. We've both been in small business. I've been through burnout. I live with ADHD and a chronic illness, so I absolutely know what it's like to have to work those things every day. And what it's like to take your own advice. Because when I burnt out, I actually had to start taking my own advice, which is really hard.
Yeah, wow.
It's much easier to give advice than,
take
live your own.
Yeah.
And then the last bit is the human-centred design. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's like if you put people at the centre and you ask them what they want and you listen to them and you acknowledge. And I think, especially when you do that, people are pretty realistic about what's appropriate. And I think sometimes managers and leaders are really worried that if they ask people, they're going to be opening Pandora's box, but that's not been our experience at all. When you put people at the centre, they feel really valued, and then they actually want to be part of it and help the organisation and help those around them. Yeah,
no, that's great. I love that approach. Thanks for unpacking that a bit more. What does wellness mean to you?
Such a good question. And this is one I've been really grappling with having fibromyalgia. Because for those who don't know, fibromyalgia, So, and it's a really interesting illness because for diagnosis, it's actually a process of elimination. There actually isn't really a test that you can do. It's not like a blood test where you go, it's high in X, so therefore you have Y.
This. Yeah.
So it's almost easier to describe by the symptoms. So the symptoms are usually kind of made of two things. One is pain, full body pain. And it varies from day to day. So I woke up this morning with no pain, which is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
But last night I went to bed and the pain was quite intense. It was quite sore. You're constantly kind of managing that. And because I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so the first bit is good. That's what it's characterised. It's also characterised by fatigue as well. So it's a little bit like a chronic fatigue kind of thing. Although, again, that varies person to person. And there's a whole lot of other random symptoms which are actually quite similar to long COVID. So, brain fog and IBS for some people. And, it's just a shopping list of things wrong with you.
Yeah, wow.
What they think it is, which is really interesting. And, for a long time, it has, in the medical community, it's still not that kind of well established and understood. And it sits in with rheumatologists, even though it's not really an autoimmune disease. So what they think it is, and they've been able to use MRIs to kind of understand what happens in the brain. And people with fibromyalgia, their brains, my partner loves this, their brains are slightly smaller. Which works two ways. It's like, can you do that? Like, my brain's too small.
I can also win with this. Yeah, totally.
But it's something to do with the central nervous system and the way that your body processes pain. So it's almost been like a switch has been flicked, and it's over analysing the pain that you have in your body, and so you're sort of almost hypersensitive to things. There is another connection with low levels of dopamine as well, which is really interesting because that ADHD is also low levels of dopamine. So I would say there's something in my body around not being able to process dopamine particularly well. It's an ever-evolving thing. Some of the most recent research has been looking at things like glutamate, which apparently fires the neurons and gets them sometimes a bit overexcited. So some of the things they've been looking at overseas is like low glutamate diets, which sadly is like spinach and tomatoes and all the things that I love eating. So again, it's as much a process of experimenting all the time. But every day I look at kind of two scales. One's a pain scale and one's a fatigue scale. I just have to kind of make an assessment about where I am and then what I'm able to do for the day.
That's crazy. I would have no idea, and I'd never heard about that before, so thanks for sort of unpacking it.
I was going to say, it's the only thing that Lady Gaga and I have in common.
Nice!
And Morgan Freeman, he has it too.
Wow, that's so interesting.
But it's interestingly enough, it's more of it's like 85% women have it compared to men, and Actually, there's a really good documentary I'd recommend on Netflix called Unrest, and it's a woman who documented her journey with ME, and it's not dissimilar to fibromyalgia in terms of the impact it has on people and what they're able to do in their lives, and how the support that they do or don't get from the medical community.
That's so interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing about that. So yeah, what does that wellness piece look like for you? What is wellness? Sorry, that's all right. No worries. That's a very important thing to say before you unpack this, because it would look different. You know, it's maybe a daily choice rather than just. So anyway, I'll let you unpack what it is for you.
So I guess in the flip side of now having that as a thing that sits at the top of this. I guess the way that I view wellbeing is quite different than I probably did in my 20s or whatever. I think the one thing I'm really, really mindful of, because we've moved around a lot, but also just all the research we've done and all the rest of it, just how important social networks are and having that social support. So and my clinical psychologist said to me when I sort of first moved here, she said, see friendships as like seeds. Scatter them out and see which ones grow into trees. And I was like, it's a beautiful way of thinking about it. So that's been a really big part of it. The exercise, and with fibro initially I stepped back because I was like, I just need to rest all the time. I'm just so exhausted. But then my partner is really, really super fit and kind of like he does like God zones and like super fit. And actually it's been really awesome because he's given me a few challenges. He's like, I want to take you up this mountain and that mountain. I'm like, yeah, I want to go up that mountain.
Cool.
So it's really forced me to have to go, okay, how do I do strength stuff? How do I keep all that? How do I keep fit so I can do that stuff even though I have this? Obviously nutrition and sleep and all those other boring things. I think the last bit to me is as much the mental skills and just being really honest with myself about where I'm at. And it's taken me a long time to be honest with myself because it was easier to just not be and just say, oh, I'm always happy and excited and but to actually sometimes go, do you know what, I'm not feeling it today, I'm just not in a good space, and then go, okay, so what do I need right now? And being really active about it.
That's so true. I think toxic positivity is a real thing.
Oh my goodness, yes.
I've definitely experienced that. I'm definitely that personality type where I'm like, everything's great, and you're like, just be honest with yourself, it's not great today, and that's fine. So that's a really interesting thing that you've mentioned there. For sure. Yeah, very interesting. Oh, there's so many ways I could take this conversation. But I want to sort of maybe talk from a business owner perspective. What's a practical tip you have for a business owner that's wanting to improve their workplace wellness, but they're just not really sure where to start? Or, I'm sure you see a bit of that.
Totally. And when I think about business owners, I guess, it's such a challenge for us, because even when I burnt out, people said to me, oh, maybe you should just step away from your business for a while. I didn't burn out so my business could burn. Like, if I step away, the entire thing will fall over. I didn't work so hard over the last few years for that to happen. So I totally get, as a business owner, it's really hard because you wear so many hats. You have to be kind of constantly available. It's not easy to step away. Crises will happen. My partner runs a backpackers, not really out of choice. It's kind of fallen on his lap. And we had a phone call the other night. Some people who've been having a party nearby were currently terrorising the backpackers. And again, it's like, you're a business owner, you can't be like, oh, well, I'll just deal with that tomorrow.
Totally.
You have to deal with it right then.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of business owners, the one thing I would say before we talk about the workplace is you have to prioritise your well-being. You don't really get a choice, because if you don't, then you'll burn out, or something will suffer, something will give. And I learned that the hard way, 100%. I mean, as I said, I burnt out spectacularly, and I kept putting everything else ahead of my own needs, and paid the consequences dearly. So I would say, number one is making sure that you're clear on what wellbeing means to you, and what are some of the things that you need to do. And one of the things I find myself saying to business owners is, no one is going to make time in your calendar for your well-being. No one's going to go, do you know what? I've cleared your calendar for the afternoon.
So
go for a hike.
Yeah.
You really have to go. In fact, that's what I do at the start of every week. I sit down, I map out when I'm going to be doing my exercise during the week.
Great.
And it just has to be whenever I can fit it in. So, for example, today I'll be picking my kids up from school after, so I'm going to try and squeeze in a quick walk before I go and pick them up. I bought some weights, so I now put weights in my backpack to practice, to make the most of that half an hour. But I just have to be really methodical, because if I don't do it, it won't happen.
Yeah.
So that's the first bit, is you're definitely business owners. And because the second bit out of that, which then impacts the workplace, is about your own role modelling. Because leaders cast a long shadow, and I'm not the first person to have said that, but it's a really important message in terms of going, what you do will impact those around you.
Absolutely.
So to the points we've kind of made earlier, I guess the first place I would start for business owners, and what we usually recommend is, just go and talk to your people. Find out where they're at. If it's not a comfortable conversation, start using some language that really works. I mean, I know at St. John's, Adele Sanders talks about your cheese falling off your cracker, which really works for people. It's like, is your cheese falling off your cracker? Like, how's it going?
Yeah, totally.
At New Zealand Rugby, they talk about mental fitness. So, how mentally fit are you feeling? Jared Hard AUT talks about burnt toast. So it's like, how charred is your toast right now? So others use batteries, what's your battery level like?
Yeah,
so whatever is the language that works. I was just talking to someone the other day who works at an electricity company, and she was like, I love this term, what lights you up? And so you could imagine that as a metaphor, like how light is your light bulb right now, or is it dim?
So true. Yeah.
So go and ask people where they're at. And then the next question is kind of what there's actually three parts. So the first part is go out and talk to people and acknowledge. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is just acknowledge where people are at, because people feel heard and they feel valued. And the second part is almost putting out, we'd like to support you, we'd like to be able to do something to help. What would support you right now? Sometimes people know the answer and sometimes they don't. And that can be a great place to almost get a blank piece of paper and go, okay, well, what are some of the things that we could think of? And just do a big brainstorm and go, okay, looking at all these things. It's what we do in behaviour change. Get people to think about what will be helpful and then choose the things that will be most helpful. And then the last is really to keep checking in with people, on a regular basis, and whatever feels most comfortable. And obviously that'll be different for different workplaces, and what those strategies will be different. But as long as there's this continual communication backwards and forwards, then that's probably the biggest things you can do.
That's a really good point. Not just doing a one-off sort of blast of wellness and then leaving it for a year or two, but checking in and asking that question. How's your batteries? Or I like that. That's very cool. If you don't mind, diving a bit deeper into burnout. I've actually experienced it before at a young age, and that was a very interesting experience for me, and one of those life-changing things of going, hold on, if I keep going like this, it's not going to be very good. For those listening, and from your perspective, what are those red flags, or those first signs of burnout? And if someone does find themselves burnt out, like what can they do to get out of that?
Yeah,
it's a big one. Big question.
No, it's a really, really good question, because I think there's almost like two answers to this. Because there's one as the person who is burning out, and what's your experience, and then if you're someone who's on the outside watching someone burn out, what does that look like? So if I talk about the first bit first, so I don't know if you experienced this with burnout, but it's what I found, is there were kind of some things when I was like, I don't feel all that great, or things don't seem like they're kind of good, but I'll plow on. I'll keep going. I went to doctors, and they would give me things like melatonin as if sleep was my only problem. Like, yep, okay, that should be fine. I'll carry on. But you kind of get to a point, and a friend of mine is a cognitive. She calls herself a cognitive scientist. She's got a master's in cognitive psychology, and she does lots of kind of disaster recovery work. And she was saying your brain gets to a point where it actually stops giving you those messages anymore, and you almost go into survival mode. And I can really identify with that. I don't know if you found that, and you actually literally. I was at the point where I was only sleeping 4 hours a night. I felt like I was almost like depersonalizing, like I was living in another universe. And I'm embarrassed to think about it now. We did a client presentation, and I'm pretty sure I seemed drunk because I was so tired and so just kind of losing my marbles. And my friend, she has bipolar, and she rang me and she said, you seem manic to me, not my kind of manic, but you seem like you're addicted to work. And I was addicted to work. So I think in terms of the signs and symptoms for me that I should have been much more aware of, I mean, the three things that we normally talk about in burnout is one is exhaustion, which is probably the number one of all of the things. But obviously exhaustion on its own is not the only thing. And exhaustion is different from a bit tired. Exhaustion is you go on holiday and you still come back feeling tired. Indifference to work. And I found that really confusing, because I love my work. It's, the business is around all the things that I love. And yet I would sit at my desk going, I just don't want to do this. I just feel really detached from it, and I can't work out why. And then the last bit is negative feelings around work. And again, that was really confusing, because I love what I do, but it was this kind of internal battle. What's also hard for me though is I also had all the fibromyalgia symptoms that were all intertwined. So it's a big messy puzzle of stuff.
Yeah, that would be massive.
Yeah, but I think, so definitely like if you're someone who's starting to feel like work is taking over, that you're not having time to do all those other things that we know are really important, that if you feel like even like your emotional gauges, you're starting to react more sensitively to things than you know that you normally would. And that was the real straw that broke the camel's back for me. I got an email from a client, and it was just some simple feedback on a report, and I broke down to tears because I just had no resilience left.
Yeah, wow.
And I look at it now and I'm like, it's such a basic email, but I just had nothing left in the tank, any of that.
To handle it.
Totally, yeah. So I think those are some of the big signs and symptoms.
Yeah.
On the other side, in terms of someone, watching someone burn out, that is really hard because often people who burn out are kind of type A personality, perfectionist, want to do a good job. In fact, we find often those professions where people burn out are the ones where these are not kind of your low performers. These are the people who give 110% and they love what they do and they want to be successful and they will just keep going.
Yeah.
So that's really hard because you're trying to pull people back, to go from 110 to 90. You're not 110 to like 50.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like the small change.
Yeah.
So I think, one, it's looking out for those things like the exhaustion and the indifference and the emotional reaction. So another friend of mine has described her partner as coming home and he's been crying a lot, and that's really, really unusual for him. But he's just so just burnt out, but can't step away from work. He's the main provider. He does love his job. It's just that the pressures are so great. So it's a really challenging thing. So yeah, it is around looking at some of those things that seem a bit unusual for behaviour, about that exhaustion, about some of the things they might be saying or doing, some of the behaviours, and then ideally, I guess trying to sound them out and get them towards support.
Yeah, and so that way out is definitely talking to someone, is that support piece. Definitely,
yeah. And it's funny enough, because that was one of the myths that, I've got some favourite myths when it comes to burnout, because and I find this really interesting because I sort of wear two hats in the burnout piece. One is obviously I've got the professional expertise, so I know a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, totally.
But I've lived it as well.
Yeah.
So in the recovery period, I was really open about it right from day one. And I posted on LinkedIn about it. I've talked about it quite openly on the media. And part of that was me just going, do you know what? I'm just going to talk about it because the worst thing that's going to happen is no one's going to buy my services. I'll go back to Nelson and I'll work in a supermarket, live with my parents. And it's not the worst thing that could happen.
Things will work out.
It'll be fine.
Wow.
So I was really open about it. But yeah, what I found was that, I think talking about it actually opened the door, and so many people came to me and go, oh my God, I feel that, but I'm too scared to talk about it. And it just said to me how much stigma there is still out there around this and people feel uncomfortable to talk about it. And that probably goes back to that earlier point around going, I feel this stuff, but I'm just going to bury it. I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. Yeah,
thanks.
Thanks for bringing some language to it, because I think people that are in it, there may be lots of people listening to this and going, actually, I do feel like that. I do feel exhausted, but I love my job, because that's a real push and pull. Like, I remember that situation being like, I love what I do, but I feel at the end of myself, I feel exhausted, and so it's a hard one, and I think people don't know what language to put around it. So thanks for doing that for us. It's really beneficial. Where do I want to go with this one? Because there's so much. How does that community piece work at Revolutionaries of Wellbeing? How does that community element? We talked a bit about it at the start, but how does that look?
It's been an interesting journey how it's kind of molded and changed. So I guess if I talk about it, how it is at the moment. So we have, as I said, the kind of the free community part of it, where people can come along to monthly webinars, and we send out weekly emails with our kind of favourite things we found on the internet about workplace wellbeing.
Cool.
As a huge part for us, it's around professional development, because when you compare workplace wellbeing to accounting or law or many of those things, like those are really well-worn career paths. You go to university, you can find a mentor, thousands have done it.
Got your linear line.
Yeah, totally. Workplace wellbeing, none of it. We all fell into it. No one went to university to study it. We're all making it up.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
No, everyone's just kind of feeling their way in the dark going, think this works, great. So we as much as we can in the community, we try to push through professional development things that we see as really important for people to be able to kind of get their head around. And and as I said, that peer sharing as well. So
brilliant.
yeah, we've got that on the one part, and then as I said, there's the professional part, which enables people to be able to connect with each other and share those resources and talk through what are some of the challenges. And what's really fascinating for me is we've got like the most amazing people. One's from Norway, we've got people from the States, Canada, and they're really, really different companies, and some of them from really massive brands, and they all have the same problems. Like, it's so consistent. It might be different because of the size of the organisation or what the workers do or whatever. But the
core of it's the same.
So many that's just exactly the same.
Yeah.
Which I think is why the community is so helpful, because what we tend to find is people who are in workplace wellbeing sort of manager roles tend to wear multiple hats. They tend to be in like health, safety and wellbeing, or they're in organisation development or HR role. But inevitably what happens is they get pulled into the compliance or the performance management or whatever the kind of business demand is, and wellbeing gets squeezed and falls off the bandwagon. Even though it's a strategic priority for lots of organisations, it's still the thing that falls off. So for them to be able to connect with other people and talk about this stuff and feel like they're not alone and that they can brainstorm ideas and try different things, I think is really, really beneficial.
Yeah, awesome. Amazing community that you're building. Well done. Very cool. Want to change things a little, or turn into more of your experience of the Icehouse and chat a little bit about that for a bit. Is that cool?
Oh, I love the Icehouse.
Nice. That's a good start. How did you initially hear of the Icehouse and decide to start working with us in coaching?
It was on my radar for a little while in the early days when I was really in dark tunnels trying to find light switches and just going, I can't quite work out where to go next, and I'm really struggling, and I tried a couple of different ideas and they hadn't quite landed, and I knew that I was onto something. I knew that wellbeing was going to be really big, but I just couldn't quite work out how to align what I wanted to do. And I was struggling at the time too, as I might have said earlier. We had kind of two brands. One was the consulting brand and one was my personal brand, and so there was some competition. I mean, I was running like social media accounts for both of them, like plus my personal ones. It's like 10 social media accounts.
That's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of posts.
I can't keep this up. And it was really only me working on the business at the time. So it had been when I was googling around, what kind of supports, and I had been into a startup incubator in Christchurch as well, and it was mostly tech companies, and so I felt like I didn't quite belong because the business model for us was a little bit different.
Totally.
So it took me a while to kind of find my feet, and so googling around and came across the Icehouse a couple of times, and that sounds really cool. And then finally all the kind of stars aligned. We'd made enough money in the business, and I was living in Gisborne then, and so I reached out and said, I think I need some coaching, I think I need some help. And so Kevin was the first coach that helped us, and he was just so great. He understood the business straight away, was able to kind of identify some of the areas where we could grow it and some of the things to park. And then he was actually still coaching when we went through, when COVID kicked off, and we decided to kind of rebrand then and just put everything under one brand. And with his background, I don't think that the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing or Row the branding would be nearly as strong without his input. He was just brilliant.
Awesome. That's so cool. And then you've done a little bit with Richard Paul as well.
And then Richard was awesome. So Kevin really helped with all that rebranding stuff, and then I stepped away for a little bit to try and just organise the business and kind of basically embed everything that we changed. And then when I'd been through burnout, I reached out again and I was like, I need somebody who's just going to hold my hand for a bit.
Accountability.
From
cool.
burnout, sort of almost be a pastoral guide to just help me a bit while I try and balance recovery with, running a business. And again, Richard was brilliant. He was so patient. He was so helpful. He was so kind. He had some really brilliant ideas which helped me to just prioritise what I needed to do.
Awesome.
And what was really cool too is, and I guess this is the brilliance of the Icehouse, is that all the things that Kevin had put in place, Richard just built off that. It was just this really natural journey, which just made it really easy. It just felt like they were all just part of an extended team that you had to call on.
That's so awesome. Special. I love that. Did you have any hesitations at the start with coaching, or were you pretty set that that's what you knew you wanted to do to sort of help grow or develop your business?
Yeah, I was pretty set on it really as something I wanted to do. The only thing that really held me back at the time was just being able to pay for it because of how the business was.
Of course.
And thankfully we were able to get some of the RBP funding, and that just was, that was a game changer.
Yeah, that was a game changer, especially over COVID for a lot of businesses, being able to tap into that and use COVID as a time to sort of redevelop their why and come out stronger, which seems to me like it's what happened with your business, which is very cool. You touched on it a little bit, and well, because we are here in Queenstown and I like to talk about regional business and doing business in different cities, how did you find the move from Gisborne to Queenstown with a business? Were there any, I know we work from home now and things, but were there any differences from working in a different city or anything you found?
Yeah, totally. Well, and it's funny because, in the time that I've had the business, I've also lived in Christchurch as well, and the three are totally different places to do business. It's really interesting just how different they are. So Christchurch is very much about your networks and who you know. And I mean, that tends to be true of business anyway, but it's very much the networks. And I guess, especially in Christchurch being post-earthquake, it was really a city in transition, and people were still grieving and quite hard, I think, especially in the wellbeing space, like quite hard.
Yeah,
and
course.
It took a long time again to kind of find my feet for the business then. And I do remember thinking at the time, man, I could not have made this harder for myself. At the time I just moved back to Christchurch. I had 2 young kids trying to do a startup in a post-quake city in wellbeing was like,
hold on.
Yeah, that's hard. But then when we got to Gisborne is such an interesting, I'd never been to Gisborne before we moved there.
Wow,
so
that's massive.
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect. And it was really interesting because before we moved there and I said to people we were moving, we got kind of 2 reactions. One was, oh my God, the beaches there are amazing. God, you'll love it. And people were like, why are you going to Gisborne? Don't tell people that your business is from Gisborne. Like, it was this real stigma about it. I'm like, why? Why would it matter? Because there's some amazing people there doing some incredible things.
Of course.
But I did find that in terms of business in Gisborne, I'm sure most people who are there would agree with me, that it's just this little pocket of the world where there's Gisborne time and it's not as well advanced. I mean, I know that they were trying to set up an HR group, and I think there's only kind of 5 people in HR roles in Gisborne, so it's both super small and I almost want to say it's a little bit behind the times in terms of how they run businesses, which is not to say that they're not innovative, because they really are, and they're doing some awesome stuff. But I think just its isolation has meant that it's just its own little community.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and then coming here has been really different again, because it is quite a global transient centre in Queenstown. There's lots of amazing people doing incredible things. It's been, funnily enough, because most of our work is actually with big organisations around New Zealand, so in all of those 3 places that I've talked about, we've actually very rarely done work locally.
Yes,
it's mostly been with people based in other places.
Yeah.
I think it should be interesting to see how it changes here, knowing that there's so much happening, and Queenstown is trying to diversify out of tourism and move into other areas, and hopefully with more big business and more things changing, we might see just more happening here.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think it's cool to talk about, because I think people are moving. I moved from Auckland to Tauranga, and chatting to someone last night at the Icehouse event who's moved from Auckland to here to Queenstown, and I think it's just more of a common thing now, business owners moving region to the regions, which is cool to talk about, that's for sure. I could honestly talk to you for another hour, like seriously, I really could, and I'm like, I've got 5 minutes, like I'm like, darn it. I'm loving it. But where do I want to take this? How can those listening play their part in the wellbeing conversation?
Oh, that's such a good question.
How can they do?
What can they do? I reckon probably the biggest thing, and I kind of mentioned this as a key message we talked about earlier, is that everyone has a responsibility.
Yeah.
Off the back of that, one of the things I talk about in my wellbeing presentations, and it talks to what I found in my experience, is who are you looking out for and who's looking out for you? Yeah. Because those are the 2 key things. And when I think about, okay, so who am I looking out for? Initially when I started to talk about that in my presentations, and because now I'm getting better at taking my own advice, I actually went, who am I looking out for? Yeah. And when you actually go, okay, well, I guess I'm looking out for my parents and my kids, and then when you get quite deliberate about it, you think, if I take on the responsibility to look out for them, maybe I should make sure I'm having those conversations, actually, checking in with them a bit more, being really deliberate. conversely, also when you think about, okay, so who's looking out for you? Again, it's about going, okay, well, who do I want to be checking in on me? Who do I trust? Who do I feel like I want to have those conversations with? And that's, I mean, not everyone is an appropriate person to have a conversation with. There are some people where that's just not where the relationship is. But knowing that you've got those people that you could, when the sky falls, that you can pick up the phone and talk to is really key. So I guess it's this two-way piece in terms of we all have a responsibility. One, that you're looking out for other people, and two, that you've got people around you. And again, you're quite deliberate in making sure you have that social network, because we know that social well-being is one of the most critical protective factors when it comes to well-being.
It's a really good point. Is if everyone in the world just decided, who are my small handful of people that I'm looking out for and who's looking out for me, would be a better place. So I like
hugely
that.
So, yeah. And I think because it sort of speaks to the loneliness factor and the disconnect that a lot of us feel. And I think that ability just to have those conversations, and it's not comfortable for everyone to have all those conversations. So it sort of talks to our piece earlier around the language and choosing what feels comfortable to talk about. But just that check-in is so important. And it doesn't have to be like we talk about this. It doesn't have to be, we are now going to talk about mental health. How is your mental health?
Totally.
No one wants to have that conversation. So my colleague was talking about a story he'd heard where at a workplace they had this app that they filled in, and if you rated, it asked you basically how you were every day, and if you rated less than a 4, I think it was, then you automatically got a call from your manager to check in. So naturally, no one wanted their manager to call every day.
Totally.
So they would just not mark down low. And that's a really good example of good intentions but wrong outcome.
So sure.
Much more powerful just to check in occasionally and ask really broad questions like, how is life for you right now? Because that's a great question. It's not talking directly to how are you, but it gives people the opportunity to talk about some of the good things, some of the challenging things, what's working.
No, that's really practical. I like that. I'm going to finish on this big open question. What are you curious about right now?
I am really curious, and I had to have a think about this earlier, and I was thinking about, I guess, from the fibromyalgia journey, because it is such a journey for me. And when I got the diagnosis at the start of 2021, I spent most of that year getting well, and I wasn't ready to dive into the research. I just wanted to just feel better, and I wasn't ready to, know the ins and outs of it. But now I'm in a better space and able to do that. So I'm really interested and curious about neurotransmitters at the moment, about how those impact the brain, what do the synapses do, how does that impact your central nervous system. Out of the back of that, I think one of the things that's quite cool is even thinking about some of the neurotransmitters and hormones and how you can hack those for your well-being. So one of the things that I've come across, which I really love, is getting your daily dose. So getting a daily dose of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And one of the things I encourage with people with ADHD is to write a menu, because we often struggle with dopamine, of things that give you dopamine. I'm like, that's so cool. To actually go, what makes me feel good? I'm going to write a menu, and then be like, oh, I feel like I'm low dopamine right now because I feel really flat.
Let's go to the menu.
Let's go to the menu. What am I going to choose? Cool. And almost, it comes from quite a cool way of trying to hack your neurotransmitters, basically. Directions you can take.
I see you as quite a curious person, which I think is probably where a lot of your passion and success comes from, is just asking why and diving that little bit deeper, and it's very cool.
Oh, and honestly, I'm such a nerd. I was telling so this is a little side note. One thing I find really important for my own well-being is when I take time out, I don't want to read women's magazines, because it's usually about well-being. I'm like, that's my job. I don't want to read it. So I have to try and find things that have absolutely nothing to do with well-being. So here's my really nerdy side. What I will often do is find old buildings that are for sale on Trade Me, and then go onto Papers Past, the National Library, and find out all about them.
I love it.
It's so nerdy. It's just
but it's so different from what you do.
Yeah. But it's still got that people element to it, which I really love.
It's awesome.
But it's so disconnected from well-being. So
that is so brilliant. I love that.
It's my inner nerd coming out.
That's good. I'm gonna not throw you off, but I'm gonna ask one extra question, and that is, what does the future look like for you?
Oh, that's such a good question. The future looks like for me, we've been using this new term at Row, which is unleash human potential. And so I guess I've been thinking about that for my own, going, okay, what would unleash human potential look like for me? And part of me goes, oh my God, that sounds like a lot of work. Like, I feel tired thinking about unleashing my human potential. which has been quite good to think about, to go, actually, unleashing your human potential is only the potential that you feel like you have on any given day. And especially with fibro, that will change. But that's okay, because what I'm trying to do is make sure I have more potential than less. And so I want it to be things like climbing mountains. I want it to be having restorative time where I'm literally lying down and I don't feel guilty about it. It's having a successful business. It's having really neat times with my children. It's getting into the great outdoors. It's just living a life that, as I said earlier, that I get to the end of and turn around and go, that was really good. I really enjoyed that.
That's so good. I love that answer. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's really great to have you part of the Icehouse community, and we had an event last night, obviously, and it's good to be in Queenstown, just catching up with some of our alumni down here. But just really cool to hear, what you're all about, the good work that you're doing back into the community, helping businesses small and large with their wellness. And I hope we've inspired some people, or maybe just given language or made them think a little bit deeper about what their life is about and where they're at currently. So appreciate you being vulnerable, opening up and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great, and just love the Icehouse. Can't speak highly enough of you all.